Good morning, everybody. We heartily welcome the honorable judges of the High Court, honorable judges from subordinate judiciary, senior counsels, advocate, and my dear beloved young advocates, and my co-host Hemalata. And today's chief guest is Mr. Rajiv Avasti, an advocate. After completing graduation and post-graduation, respectively BSc and MSc in Science, he did law from Campus Law Center, University of Delhi, and obtained a law degree in the year 1991. And he started practicing before the Honorable Delhi High Court and the Honorable Supreme Court. He was handling cases under Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002, representing the prosecuting agencies like ED, Government of India as special counsel before Appellate Tribunal, PMLA, and various honorable high courts, and before the Honorable Supreme Court for the last 12 years. He has won constitutional validity of Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002 before Division Bench of Andhra Pradesh High Court, appearing on behalf of ED, got interpretation of the provisions of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act from Division Bench of Bombay High Court, and presently is handling all important cases registered under the provisions of money laundering. And he is regularly invited by the National Judicial Academy at Bhopal to give special lectures to honorable judges of the various high courts and CBI special judges, session judges on the provisions of the Money Laundering Act 2002 and other related economic offenses. And he has written many articles published in various law journals and newspapers, and also featuring in electronics media. And he was nominated as legal counsel for American High Commission, British High Commission, Australian High Commission, Italy High Commission, and Belgium High Commission, etc. The credentials of Mr. Avasti is a long list. With this warm note of welcome, I request Mr. Rajiv Avasti to start his webinar.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, honorable judges and dear colleagues and friends who joined me on this webinar. This legislation has not brought in, as normally happens in India, by lighting candles at India Gate. But this is a global initiative where various member state countries realize the menace of money laundering, black money, which is causing a serious financial threat to their nations. And the money generated by so is being used for terrorist financing. The initially 1988, the Vienna Convention, India being signatory of the same, have basically shown their concern that how to curb this menace of black money. So they decided to have some form of deterrence, and thereafter Palermo Convention and various other conventions, finally they decided that let's have a legislation to combat this menace of money laundering. So accordingly, I'm not going into minute details. Finally, the global bodies, member states realized that we should have a legislation where some common provision should be there in the legislation, which can really give effective teeth. So there should not be any in-between situations where the other state, member state is not cooperating or legislation is different. So therefore, they have created a body called FATF, that is called Financial Action Task Force, whose prime objective was to give a common minimum platform, the provisions which should minimum incorporate in the legislation, where they should show uniformity in their legislation as far as member states are concerned. India was not the member state at that stage. So the FATF made 40 recommendations. 40 recommendations means they have given what should be the legislation, what should be the phase, what are the minimum requirement, what should be basic ingredient should contain in those. So these are called FATF 40 recommendations. So FATF is the body who is overseeing the implementation of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act in various member states. Now, India was not the member state because we were not complying certain recommendations which were there for compliances. So thereafter, we were deliberating with FATF, a lot of meetings were held. And fortunately, there was a government body consisting of cabinet secretaries and chief of various financial institutions, etc., and all the ministries. So I became fortunate. They made me part of that group where I represented India before FATF. First in India, 2-3 meetings, and finally in 2010, the final meeting of the FATF in Australia. So I was taken there. We made presentations along with the government body. And fortunately, some little efforts of mine and all other persons, the India is made a member of FATF, that world body. So now we are one of the member states. So this is the brief history. So considering that India in 1998, a cabinet approves the prevention of money laundering bill. Thereafter, it was being tabled in 2000 onwards, and then a lot of deliberations took place. Finally, this act was enacted in the year 2002. That is why it is called Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002. However, it was not notified because the legislators, the member of parliaments, have shown serious concern about certain provisions and are safeguarding the innocent persons who acquired the proceeds of crime innocently. So first time I have seen during my lifetime that good deliberations took place in parliament, including the participation of Mr. Ram Jethmalani, P. Chidambaram, Kapil Sibal, and various other legal luminaries who were our parliamentarians. And considering their grievances, their concerns, like in section 3, which is a prosecuting, which is a punishment, or which is a offense under money laundering, certain provisions were amended, and finally this act came into existence from 1/7/2005. So thereafter, they decided that Enforcement Directorate would be the nodal agency to investigate the offences under Prevention of Money Laundering Act. However, because untrained manpower, a new legislation, no background, nothing, so ED was very conscious initially. Finally, in first case was registered in the year 2007, which is a very peculiar and high-profile case because money laundering was not in limelight that time. So, however, it was very important because a ship was intercepted in high sea by the DRI, where the searches were made and found 200 kg of cocaine in timber log, hidden in timber logs. So this was intercepted in high seas. Then finally, because the NDPS was one of the scheduled offences, the investigation under money laundering also commenced. Now with this, I will now come to the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. What are the basic features and what are the significant points and what is the scheme of the act? So as I said, that aim and object of this act is to combat the menace of money laundering. Now, basically, this act has 75 sections. Now, 75 sections, more or less, many are procedural in nature. This act revolves around 4 provisions, basically. Section 5, Section 8, Section 3, and Section 4. Basically, the entire act revolves around these 4 provisions. Now, Section 5 and 8 relates to the attachment of properties, its confirmation, which are derived and obtained from the proceeds of crime. And Section 3 is an offense of money laundering, and Section 4 is the provisions of punishment and conviction, etc. So this is how this act basically revolves around. Now we come to the definition of proceeds of crime, that is under Section 2U. Which says that proceeds of crime means any person directly or indirectly obtains and receives the proceeds of crime which are derived and obtained from commission of scheduled offense. Now friends, I will tell that scheduled offenses basically are described in the act. Scheduled offenses are the bone, because unless the person commits the scheduled offense, there is an FIR or RC by the CBI, or a complaint by NCB, etc. No cognizance, no action under PMLA can be taken. I'll just explain this scheme further. So proceeds of crime means any property derived and obtained by commission of the offense of scheduled offense. Scheduled offenses are defined in part 1, paragraph 1 to paragraph 28. Earlier, there were three scheduled offenses categories, part 1, paragraph A, B, and C. But subsequently, part B, by amendment in 2012, has merged in part A, which are IPC offenses, etc., and serious offenses. So, section 2, basically 2U, defines the proceeds of crime. Section 3 is the offense of money laundering, that whosoever directly or indirectly, knowingly assists or involved in any process or activity connected with the proceeds of crime and actually involved in the process, including possession, acquisition, concealment, and claiming to be the owner of that, will be guilty of the offense of money laundering. So now the prosecution and the offense is at the initial stage would be prima facie. But what happens? Suppose there is a schedule offense. For example, 460, there is an FIR under section 467, 468, 471, etc., etc. Now 467 is the schedule offense. Then immediately of course, a charge sheet would be filed. But the requirement for taking action under PMLA is, as described under section 5, that if the director or any other officer not below the rank of deputy director has reason to believe, such reason to believe should be recorded in writing, that any person is in possession of proceeds of crime, he may by order in writing provisionally attach the properties, and thereafter, this is under section 5(1). But the mandate requires, if he attaches the properties provisionally, which will remain valid now up to 180 days. So within which period that the enforcement directorate has to file a complaint before adjudicating authority, which is an independent body created under the Act consisting of chairperson and 2 other persons. One is judicial, technical, and of course, chartered accountant, etc. So this is not the adjudication is not by the officials of the ED, but by an independent body. Now the mandate is that once you pass a provisional attachment order under section 5(1), then within 30 days from that order, you have to file a complaint before adjudicating authority, which could be based on the complaint as well as the relied upon material, etc., on the basis of prima facie opinion is made and provisionally attached. Now, thereafter, filing a complaint under section 5(5), once the complaint is filed, then under section 8(1), the adjudicating authority will issue notice to the aggrieved person, whosoever is the aggrieved person, to come forward and file its reply within 30 days from the date of notice, and also along with that any document and material to justify his claim that this is not the proceeds of crime. Now section 8(2) also mandate a very beautiful embargo on the adjudicating authority, that while adjudicating, the authority comes to know that there is somebody else is the owner or the claimant of that property, then the adjudicating authority must issue notice to that person also, calling upon him to file its reply, etc. The same procedure will follow. And then I must say, this is not a trial. First of all, this is an inquiry stage. So therefore, the inquiry will consist of, based on the material which is filed by the ED and also filed by in the form of reply and relied upon documents by the defendants. The detailed arguments take place from both sides. They go through all the document material, whatever are the defense and objections. And if the adjudicating authority, after hearing both the party, feels that the properties are involved in money laundering, then they can confirm the attachment order under section 8.3. The language would be, the attachment shall continue during the pendency of the offense under this act, meaning Money Laundering Act. I will explain how the amendments have gone through. So 8.3, then thereafter property would be retained by the Enforcement Directorate, and under section 8.4, the possession will be taken of the property by the Enforcement Directorate. Now, after 2018 rules for taking possession of the attached properties, it is mandatory on the Enforcement Directorate to give 10 days notice of eviction, so the person can exhaust his remedy. Now, see the difference. Difference is, if the officer provisionally attached the property under section 5.1, then as per section 5.4, he will not be deprived of enjoyment of the properties. He will continue to possess and enjoy. But once it is confirmed by the adjudicating authority under section 8.3, 8.4 mandates the possession will be taken by the Enforcement Directorate, meaning thereby he will be deprived of enjoying that property, which is a proceeds of crime. Now, this is the basic scheme, that which I said the 4 sections which are revolving around. Because so far, whatever law, judgments, arguments, interpretations have gone through, basically is gone through and for the interpretation of the provisions of section 5 and 8, recording of reason to believe, etc., etc., etc. I'll come later what has gone through so far till Supreme Court. So now I've explained the basic scheme. Now under 8.4, under 8.3, if adjudicating authority confirms it, 8.4 ED take the possession. 8.5 mandates that if the person has been acquitted in the offense of money laundering, then the attachment will also go, right? So now, most important thing is that this act came from 1/7/2005. You can see the significance and importance and the manner in which the courts are interfering or adjudicating the issues, that this act has undergone amendments 5 times. First in 2005, second in 2009, third is in 2012, fourth is in 2016, and fifth is in 2018. Rather, one provision is amended by Finance Bill 2019 also. I'll come to that. So 2005 amendments came into effect from 1/5/2007. 2009 amendments came into effect from 1/6/2009, and 2012 amendments came into effect from 21st February 2013. So this is the journey of amendments. The remaining amendments of 2015, 18, 19 are by way of Finance Bill. So Finance Bill, I will not go into that aspect because Finance Bill, it is the Parliament's prerogative. So this is how this act has undergone. Now, why these amendments? Now, as I told you, that the FATF supervise the implementation of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act and its provisions in all member states. So every time there is a review that how effectively it is doing, what are the deficiencies, what are the areas of concern, and accordingly FATF shows its concern, make further recommendations, which recommendations are to be undertaken by the Government of India, being signatory of the Vienna Convention. So accordingly, whenever FATF has recommended, shown their concerns, made recommendations, the act has been amended to overcome those deficiencies which are where the FATF shown the concern. So this is how the amendments have taken place. Now, as honorable judges and honorable lawyers, colleagues, now what I explain is the most significant part, where this act really is coming into the web of a lot of litigation, lot of interpretations. The reason is 2005 Act was completely dependent on schedule offense. As I told you, that unless and until there is a commission of schedule offense and there is a charge sheet in the court, no action under money laundering can be taken. So this was the scheme. Now the second most important part was, as I told, under section 8(5). Earlier, before 2012, the act was that if the person is acquitted in schedule offense, the attachment ceases to have an effect. This was till 2012, meaning thereby, if the person is acquitted in the schedule offense or discharge, the attachment automatically ceases to have an effect, meaning thereby the proceedings under money laundering is no more relevant. This was the scheme of the act. Now here the member like FATF has shown the concern that this act is a toothless act. Because of many reasons, person can be acquitted in schedule offense because of technicalities, because of hostile witnesses, etc., etc. Then where is the investigation of money laundering? So anyway, all these things were deliberated. Then in 2012, it has completely changed its color. Now, what are the differences? In 2005, the act was that if the adjudicating authority reached to this conclusion that the person is in possession of proceeds of crime, he confirms the provisional attachment order and records the finding under section 8(3) that the attachment shall continue during the proceedings under the schedule offense. Now see the correlation that you cannot initiate action till there is an FIR or charge sheet before the court. So the proceedings relating to schedule offense are already pending, and he confirms under section 8(3) saying that attachment shall continue during the proceeding in the schedule offense. So there is no ambiguity. Things were absolutely smooth. But in 2012, there is an absolute change. 2012 now, they say that when adjudicating authority confirms, this says it shall continue during the proceedings relating to the offense under this act, meaning thereby the prosecution complaint should be in the court under section 3 and 4 for the offense of section 3. So there is a complete depart. Earlier it was dependent on schedule offense. Now it is a standalone act. Standalone act means the schedule offense is still mandatory, but it remains a triggering point. That for initiation of action under money laundering, there has to be a charge sheet, there has to be an FIR, etc., etc. But even if you are acquitted in schedule offense, it is irrelevant. The trial of money laundering should go, and if the person is acquitted in in the offense of money laundering, then the attachment ceases to have an effect. So there is a complete depart. Earlier it was toothless in the sense that completely dependent on schedule offense. Now nothing doing. Even if you are acquitted in schedule offense, you can still be prosecuted for the offense of money laundering. And if you are guilty for the offense of money laundering, properties would be attached and confiscated. So this is the major amendment as far as offense of money laundering is concerned. So this is how the shape and color of this act has changed after the amendment have come. Now, as I told, this is basically because reason is the attachment is an immediate measure, urgent and immediate measure to preserve the properties derived and obtained from the proceeds of crime. So therefore, prosecution is completely independent. When the evidence concluded, everything is done, thereafter they will file a prosecution complaint. But now, after 2015, by finance bill, what has been added under section 8? That the attachment if the attachment order is passed by the adjudicating authority, that within 90 days, now it has come to 365 days, they should file a prosecution complaint, which according to me is completely contrary to the procedure of Criminal Procedure Code, where the limitation for the offenses, because here the sentence could be up to 7 years, so the limitation could be of 3 years or something like that. But what I am trying to say is this, that now earlier there was no limitation. If the attachment is done in 2007 or 8, it is confirmed by the adjudicating authority, the prosecution complaint still can be filed in 2019 also. But after 2015 amendment, in section 8, this is if the attachment order is confirmed by the adjudicating authority, then within 365 days, there should be a prosecution complaint before the court. That is why you must have seen in the recent time, within 2 years, 99 or 2019 onward, there is a number of prosecution complaints filed in the court, before the trial court. Now, one more important aspect which I would like to emphasize, which is required by honorable judges and the lawyers also to understand. The earlier, as under section 8.3, adjudicating authority confirms and says it shall continue during the pendency relating to the offense under this act. Now, the person started crying that a trial will go for years together, and if I'm a legitimate claimant, this person has defrauded me and shown himself as a owner, but actually I am the claimant. Then what will happen to me? I can't wait for 15 years, 12 years, 7 years, 8 years when the trial is going to conclude. So 2013, there is another amendment in 2015, saying that under section 8, subclause 8, that any person who is a legitimate claimant can approach the special judge PMLA who is trying the offense of money laundering and make an application that, look, these are the documents, this is how I am the actual claimant and owner of the property, which is not a proceeds of crime, and I have genuinely purchased or owned this property. Then the trial court, that is special judge PMLA, has power after adjudicating that issue, giving opportunity to enforcement directorate also, or any other person who's claiming, can order release of the property even during the pendency of the trial. So this is also one of the major amendments now, because a lot of time the courts are confused with the issue that what will happen, the person who is otherwise a legitimate claimant, he can't wait to end the trial. So this is how this amendment was brought in, and now the person can actually ask for that this property belongs to me and could be handed over to him also. So this is one of the major amendments which has come into existence. Now, another aspect which I want to touch is that since prosecution has now emerged because of the amendments of 365 days limitation, now many a time we get confused about the trials. Now, reason is section 45(1)(c) mandates that if the schedule offense trial, CBI trial, which is going before a magistrate's court, and the PMLA prosecution is going before a special judge PMLA, which is a designated court. In that situation, the law mandates, the act mandates that if the enforcement directorate moves an application before the magistrate for transfer of the trial of schedule offense in the court of special judge PMLA, then the word is shall. The magistrate has no other option but to transfer the schedule offense trial before the special judge trial court PMLA. And both the trials will tried jointly. Jointly, not in the senses by a common charges, etc., etc. There will be two different trials, but will go in the same court. And there is a reason behind it. The judge would be in a better situation to appreciate the two different kind of evidences adduced before him, because as far as enforcement directorate is concerned, the entire evidence would be in the form of documents, either electronic documents or digital documents or paper documents, because there is nothing called eyewitness or somebody who is giving the reason, but basically the ED has to prove the money trail, and money trail could only be on the basis of documentary evidences. So there are two different kind of evidence. One is completely oral testimonies, mostly oral testimonies as far as schedule offense is concerned. Of course, there would be documents also, but ED would be exclusively and solely on the documentary, on documentary evidence, digital evidence, electronic evidence. So the honorable judge would be in a better position to appreciate, but I am here as a lawyer conscious of the fact that even the evidences coming in one particular trial, that for example money laundering, cannot be used for conviction or sentence for the trial of schedule offense. Both are independent evidences, but still there would be a better appreciation in the mind of judge while he is deciding both the cases separately. So this is one of the important aspects that section 45(1)(c) mandates. There would be a joint trial, but separate trials in before the special judge PMLA, and the application moved under section 44(1)(c), sorry, my apology. Then the magistrate or the session judge trying the offense of schedule offense have no other option but to transfer the trial before the special judge PMLA. So both the trials can run simultaneously before the same court. This is the scheme under section 44. Now 43 talks of special judge, constitution, high court will notify, etc., etc., etc. Now another aspect, I'm not meticulously examining each and every section, because I know there is an act. Honorable judges and lawyers are much smarter to read the act, but I am giving my practical input that what is all gone through so far. And when you go before a court of law with the kind of money laundering trial or proceedings, that basic knowledge one should have, that what intricacies are involved now and how this act has taken a shape so far and what the courts are saying. Now, two most important things when it comes to proceedings under money laundering, section 23 and section 24. Section 23 talks of interconnected transactions. Now, what does it mean? Its meaning is that if the ED is bringing 15 transactions, which according to them is tainted property, but they are able to show evidence qua 5. They can link 5 transactions with the documentary evidence. So section 23 empowers the court or to them, to adjudicate authority, to say this, that these are also interconnected transactions, presumption for interconnected transaction, meaning thereby if the 5 are proved, remaining 10, it is presumed, are also tainted property, unless or otherwise proved. So this is called presumptions for interconnected transactions. Now section 24, burden of proof. Before 2012, the burden of proof was very simple. There was no reversible burden of proof. The Act says section 24, burden of proof is on the accused to discharge. But in 2010, the Satyam Group has challenged the Act before the Andhra Pradesh High Court Division Bench, and challenged the virus of various provisions of the money laundering. And after marathon arguments, etc., which is a Bible on money laundering judgment that is called V. Rama Raju versus Union of India and others, where, of course, the provisions of money laundering's constitutional validity was upheld by the Andhra Pradesh High Court. But two things which they observe is that as far as Section 24 is concerned, you can't say this. If the person has innocently acquired and is not the accused of the offense of money laundering, then it is the reverse burden on the ED to discharge that the person is in possession of proceeds of crime. But if the person is accused of the offense of money laundering, then it is upon the accused to discharge the burden. This amendment, then on the basis of the judgments and finding of the Honorable High Court, the Act was accordingly amended in 2012, bringing this amendment into effect. So this is also one of the important aspects which I want to do. Now, if I go through the scheme of the Act, as I said, Section 2 talks of Section 2U, proceeds of crime. Section 5 is attachment by the officer and filing of the complaint before adjudicating of authority. Then Section 3 is the offense. Section 4 is the sentence. How much sentence is up to 7 years. And then thereafter, 6 is the constitution of adjudicating authority. And then basically I'm coming to the important that Section 8 is the adjudication. What will happen, as I explained earlier, 8.3, 8.4, 8.5 and 8.8 I've explained. And then 9 is the confiscation. Now 9, why I'm important, I'm saying that earlier the power of confiscation was with the adjudicating authority. Now after the amendments, the power of confiscation is given to the special judge PMLA. The adjudicating authority has no power. So that is confiscation. Section 19 talks of arrest. And of course, there are one, as a lawyer, we should understand, there is one significant difference. First of all, ED officer, he is not a police officer. He is empowered specially under the Act. Therefore, the certain rigors of that police should follow, should not come into operation like this. Number 2, Section 65 says that unless and until it is inconsistent with the provisions of the money laundering, the provisions of CRPC would be applicable. Like, for example, trial will go as per the procedure prescribed. Everything will be same. So therefore, the trial accordingly will go according to the CRPC provisions, which is required for the trial. Now, Section 16 to 22 are search and seizure. Personal search, search of the premises. Then if the under Section 17 search is made, document etc. is recovered, then again the Section 8 provisions will follow of the adjudication, because in the same sense that once they confiscate any they seize any document during search, then they have to file a complaint before the adjudicating authority within 30 days for seeking retention of those records. And accordingly, hearing will take place, replies, rejoinders, etc. The authority will find that yes, these documents required for the purpose of trial, they can order for retention. So this is called Section 17 provision. Section 80 is in a personal search. Same thing would follow. Section 21, movable property, immovable properties, retention, etc. So 16 to 22 are search and seizures. Now earlier, the search and seizure was also dependent on the charge sheet. But now after the amendment, they can go for search and seizure even at the stage of FIR. This is another very important aspect, that the earlier same situation was, same embargo was there, that there must be a charge sheet of the scheduled offense before the court. But now, as far as search and seizure are concerned, the search and seizure could take place even at the stage of FIR. So, because this is an urgent reason, otherwise things will go off. So this is how the amendments have come into operation. So search and seizure, I'm not going for much elaboration on that. Now, therefore, the section 23, 24, I've already explained. Now, most important thing is that section 71. Section 71 talks of overriding effect, that this act has an overriding effect. So this is one important aspect is concerned. Now, section 50 to 58, as I said, it's a global initiative, and the legislator, the world body, the member states have thought of some kind of a common understanding right between. So section 50 to 58 talks of the help by the contracting states. Contracting states who are members, they can render all possible help if the prosecuting country is making any request, but the process again would be issuance of letter of regulatory and which are required from the court of law, etc., from special judge PMLA, etc. But they will extend their help. Earlier, there is no such provision in any other act. But now, because it's a global initiative, all member states have agreed to cooperate with each other for the purpose of proceeding under the offense of money laundering. Now, one important aspect is this, that as if the property situated outside country, but is identified here, and the prosecution is going here, the proceedings are going here, and if the adjudicating authority confirms the provisional attachment order, then that order of the adjudicating authority would be enforceable by the contracting state, and they will attach that property in their country and would be finally available for India once it is order confiscation after the trial is over. So these are section 50 to 58, how the contracting states would cooperate with each other and what procedures are to be followed. So this is what basically I intend to tell about the act, and the things have gone so far. But again, I said, many high courts have given different interpretations. Now, two important things which I wanted to highlight is that one is the constitutional validity judgment of Andhra Pradesh High Court. One must read because every provision has been explained and given interpretation. Second is the division bench of Mumbai High Court, which is Radha Mohan Lokotia versus Union of India. Now, what basic challenge right from beginning came to me, because 2005 Act used to say, as section 5, that any if the officer not below the rank of deputy officer has reason to believe, such reason to believe recorded in writing, that any person is in possession of proceeds of crime and may attach the property provisionally, right? Then the language of the section was, any person is in possession of proceeds of crime, such person having charge of committed the scheduled offense, and then he will conceal or transfer or dealt with, etc., etc. C. Now, B was giving the interpretation that the property of a person can only be attached who is charged with the scheduled offense and nobody else. Then it came an open challenge to me. I said, which criminal will keep the property with himself? He immediately transferred. He layered here and there. So I got an interpretation for adjudicating authority that no, wherever the proceeds of crime have traveled, that property would be subjected to attachment, irrespective of the fact whether has person innocently acquired or knowingly assisted. Then it came before tribunal. I won before tribunal also. Then it has gone to as a first appeal before the Mumbai High Court division bench. So there was a huge challenge before me, and then the senior battery of lawyers of top lawyers, Shirish Gupta, etc., Bombay, and Amit Desai, etc. This is a draconian law. How can somebody else's property would be attached? He has nothing to do with the offense. He has not committed any offense, etc., etc., etc. The bench was headed by Justice Khanwilkar. He said, after 5 minutes, they said, yes, Mr. Counsel. So I said, Lord, this is a new law and it requires, it's a complete different scheme. Let me explain. No. Every law is a new law. We go through every day new law. This is not done. How can you do this? And within 5 minutes, the first appeal, our 70, 80 cases are dependent on that. The judgment was resolved. So I was like off mind what to do. Then I turned, I said, Milord, can I take 1 minute? Yes. But while going through this, if Lordship feel that some assistance is required somewhere, because by Lordship's one stroke of pen, our 70, 80 cases so far registered will be finished. No, we'll see. So while arguing before Andhra Pradesh High Court after 20-25 days, I received a call from department that we rush to Bombay and the matter is kept for directions. Then I reached next day, 11:45, entire board was discharged. They said, yes, Mr. Avasthi, tell us. So till 4:30, I continued with the scheme, etc., everything. Then I explained. Then they said, Mr. Avasthi, we are thankful to you. Because that is how Radha Mohan Lakhotia came, and they said, no, the right interpretation is wherever the proceeds of crime has traveled, in whatever person is having the possession of that, whosoever is having the possession of that, will be subjected to attachment. He may not be finally prosecuted for the offense of money laundering in absence of mens rea. Because the proceeds of crime, if the person is indulging, is always changing hands. Like in Radha Mohan Lakhotia, the Om Prakash Nugwaja, where said 200 kg of cocaine was recovered from ICs. This is the same case. What he did is that from his NRO account from Thailand, he was transferring the money to his account in India, and thereafter gifting 3 crores, 4 crores, 9 crores, 8 crores to his family members and relatives, showing as a gift, etc., etc. So then we have attached those property. This is how the issue came under challenge, and we won that. And no, all these properties will be subjected to attachment. So this is how the interpretation is given. But now in 2009, the proviso to section 5(1) was added, where they said, notwithstanding anything in clause B, property of any person can be attached if there is urgency, has reason to believe, such reason to believe to be recorded in writing by the officer, then he can attach. So this is how it can. Excuse me. Then finally, in 2012 amendment, section 5(1)B was omitted, which I was saying in 2009 to the department and to the ministry, but it was then omitted. So this is how these two judgments of B. Ramaraju and Radha Mohan Lakhotia has changed the approach towards this act, and the actions were justified taken by the enforcement directorate with regard to attachment of the proceeds of crime in various hands wherever it has traveled. So this is what how the provisions are being interpreted by the court. Now, 2019 by Finance Bill, they said that even there is no FIR, the property can be attached. See the mild difference. Earlier, unless there is a charge sheet of the schedule offense and FIR, no action under PMLA. Then as far as search and seizure were concerned, they said no, even at the stage of FIR, it is fine. But now this says even there is no FIR, a simple complaint is pending, either before CBI or anybody. The search seizure operations can take place. So that is one thing. This act is taking shape after the shape as the need and the recommendation of FATF comes, as the provisions are interpreted by the court of law. And I say with all humility, so far, the various judgments for and against have come. For example, Mahanivesh Oil, where the Honorable Delhi High Court says, once the crime goes, like schedule offense goes, there is no question of proceeds of crime. The money laundering proceedings also go. So there are other interpretation also with regard to recording reason to believe, whether the adjudicating authority has to record reason to believe or not. But before Radhaman Lakotia and Bombay High Court, I gave an interpretation that why? Because under Section 5, it is mandatory that the officer should record reason to believe in writing. Now, under Section 8, adjudicating authority is a quasi-judicial body. He issues notice. It means they have applied their Mandi courts. I gave the example that if 1,000 pages writ petition is filed before the Honorable reaches mentioned on the same day and reaches after for hearing at 2 o'clock. And the Honorable Judge, after hearing prima facie arguments and looking into certain papers, says, okay, fine, issue notice. It doesn't mean that a detailed order is to be required that why notice is issued. So I said, issuance of provisional attachment by an officer itself are the reasons to believe, because why he has provisionally attached the properties is given in the provisional attachment order. He may record in the file or not is not that material. Of course, the file they are recording the reasons to believe, but I said provisional attachment order itself is a reason to believe, and then adjudicating authority need not to record reasons to believe, because as mandated under Section 5(1), it is not mandated under Section 8(1). So there is a lot of good interpretation which are going on still at the verge of taking a shape, because all these matters, either Mahanivesh Oil or Arun Kumar Mishra, where the major differences have come, have now gone to Honorable Supreme Court. And unless Honorable Supreme Court gives some kind of interpretation, so far, this act is fairly interpreted by the various high courts by giving interpretation to various provisions. And I told you very specifically, so far we are traveling with the maximum litigation on Section 5 and 8, attachment and confirmation, because trials were not taking shape before 2019, but after the amendment of 365 days mandate, the prosecution, lot of prosecution complaints are now filed before the court. But still there is a conflict somewhere whether it should be jointly tried by a special judge PMLA. As I told you, before Delhi, I faced this challenge because in one or two matters, in spite of Section 44(1)(c) amendment, the special judge PMLA, who were assisted by a panel lawyer, gave the interpretation that no, since this is a district judge has a power that this particular district court is assigned for CBI special judge cases, etc. So no case can be transferred to any other. So there were judgments, but I was brought there. I argued one of the matter and shown them the intention and the judgments, etc. That no, the administrative order will not supersede the legislative intent, where Section 44(1)(c) says that once an application is moved before the scheduled offence court, he has no other option but to transfer it to the trial to the PMLA court, special judge PMLA. So finally, with dealing with all those cases, etc., and then giving interpretation as given by me and the judgment, the court has said nothing doing, that we have to transfer the matter. So these are the challenges which are coming to the court, to the lawyers, etc., etc. Now, this is what I basically touched upon the acts, and so far things have taken place. I received a request from one of the very prestigious honorable senior of mine, I must say that, where this is that internet fraud, how this can be tackled in the current situation with regard to money laundering and the internet fraud, etc. First, that I'm not a cyber expert, number one, but during my instinct with this act for 12 years, I have been involved in the investigations also. I've been involved in the trial courts also. And I have been also seen the modus operandi adopted in committing the frauds also. Because as I told you, till 2012, from 2007, I was the only lawyer. So everything was coming to me and I was doing it. But because of increase of work, then panel was formed and, things have. Still, all important cases are handled by me. I don't want to take names of those cases. But situation is, I'll give you one example of the money laundering, classic case of money laundering. 2008 or 9. The IDFC IPOs were declared. That is called Gujarat, Ahmedabad scam. Now, IDFC IPO declared, and what the people have done, now there are 3 categories of persons. One were key players, other were financiers and beneficiaries. What they have done is, they have provided money to the key players. Now, I must explain that the shares were for the allotment under RII category, that is retail individual investors category, where one person can make only one application and the limit cap was around 43,000 per application. Now, what the key players have done, they have downloaded to complete the KYC formalities, they have downloaded the identities from Shaadi.com website of the persons. And by forging their signatures, etc., in connivance with the bank officials, one person has opened 5,000, 6,000 Demat accounts and applied lakhs application for the IPOs on the basis of finances provided by the financer in 100 crores, 200 crores. And then suppose the IPO price was 34 rupees, then off-market transaction was around 48 or 44 rupees. They have made off-market transactions and earned crores and crores of rupees benefit. Like, I think the total scam was around 2,000 crores. So they have earned around 500 to 600 crores in that process. So see the modus operandi, that to complete the KYC formality, downloaded the Shaadi.com from website for the person's identity, post their signatures, and apply under RII category in lakhs and lakhs applications by opening Demat accounts. So this is how the white collar crime is being committed. And before that, the CBI, in this case also CBI registered the case, but CBI only confined to the limited aspect whether the forgery is done or not. When we took over for the money laundering investigation, all eyes were opened because we started attaching those assets. Nobody was scared of CBI case. But once we started attaching the assets, then it was an absolute chaos. And we have attached hundreds and hundreds of crores in that case, which has been confirmed also by up to appellate tribunal, and the appeals are pending in High Court. So this is what the modus operandi are. Now you must have seen the recent span, like after 2017, where the bank frauds. Now the recent time, 60% cases are bank frauds. There's a lot of interesting developments have taken place recently. Now, very conveniently, people are able to, the thieves and cunnings are able to find out loopholes, etc. So, what the situation has emerged now, the banks who have themselves filed an FIR that the bank have been cheated, now approaching the tribunal or High Court in some matters, intervening, saying that please hand over the assets to us. These assets were pledged to us, so this is not a proceeds of crime. Please hand over. Now, how the assets can be handed over to them? Once now this has become a case property. But the courts, governments, everybody remained concerned because the loan amounts were not small, 2,000 crore, 10,000 crore, 15,000 crores. The banking system was really under trouble. That is the reason amendment of 8.8 was brought in, where they says, if the person says that I am the legitimate claimant of the proceeds of crime, then the trial court, that is special judge, has power to release those assets in favor of the legitimate claimant if an application is made under section 8.8. This is the most interesting development which has taken place due to the huge number of banking fraud cases, and in all cases the money laundering prosecution is going. Either you take NSCL, either you go for this Vijay Mallya, or many other, DHFL, etc., etc. All are running into 5,600 crores, 9,000 crores, 6,000 crores. So this is how 8.8 has been brought in to give some relief to the banks to recover their loan amount, etc. But again, there is a lot of litigation under 8.8 stage. Everybody comes and fights. No, should not be given, should not be handed over, as happening in Vijay Mallya matter. Because I'm counsel in that, so I'm fighting that like 5-6 years in Vijay Mallya matters. I made them really suffocated, not allowed them to withdraw a single penny. But then DRT came, DRT degree came, and then the wound up. The company was bound by the Karnataka High Court. Appeal filed both the division bench, again gone. Then some miscellaneous application for selling of assets. So litigation goes. But the question is that correct interpretation, correct approach of the law we must have. Our biggest problem is this act is being butchered because of not proper assistance in the court of law. Because judges ultimately need assistance. Unless you rightly explain the scheme of the act, definitely good law will come. If not, the bad law will come, which will hurt everybody. So this is how things have moved so far. And host, I'm comfortable. I can keep on going with this act for days together. If you want some things to, hello?
Yes, sir, you can proceed, sir. No worries.
Okay. So this is how things have gone so far. Now, if I give you an example of certain issues as a lawyer which are coming and agitated before the courts also, high courts also, that during investigation, the ED normally issue a letter prohibiting either the sub-registrar office or bank or any other institution saying that please freeze this amount, don't allow any transaction in this particular account as the investigation on money laundering is going on. A lot of people have approached the High Court that how the ED has no power of issuing such prohibitory orders, this and that. Then a lot of interpretation came that no, as under sections 102 of CRPC, where the police can issue such orders, the ED on the similar analogy can go for it with regard to investigation purposes. Like in Prakash P. Shah of Ahmedabad judgment, they have held like this. But the contrary judgments have also come from Chennai High Court, from other High Court, where they said, no, there is no such power under 102 CRPC with the ED. But again, things have gone up to Supreme Court, etc., to get a correct interpretation, etc., etc. So this is how one challenge after the other challenge is coming, which is being scrutinized by the court of law and giving their interpretation subjected to whatever assistance has been provided and understood the provisions, etc. Now I come to the trials. First of all, the major difference which I want to point out with regard to arrest. As I told, that ED officer is not the police officer. Therefore, the rigor of the procedural aspect to be taken by the police is not applicable to the ED officers because they are empowered under the special statute. Now, another important aspect, the difference which during trial I pleaded before the court, that look, the statement recorded under Section 50, Clause 2 of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act is a quasi-judicial nature, admissible under the Evidence Act. Like in case of police, 161 statement is not admissible under the Act. Similarly, when we make arrest, when the ED official makes an arrest, he has to record reasons of arrest in writing, giving the material and the opinion why he wants to arrest, and should be recorded in writing. There is no such requirement as far as police is concerned. So there is a complete depart. Therefore, the statement given to the ED official under Section 50, Clause 2 of the PMLA is admissible under the Evidence Act. It has a value during trials. Why people are agitating of joint arm, though separately? Because he may not be, he may be able to give some glitch to the statements which are oral testimonies, etc., in the schedule offense. But as far as Section 52 is concerned, though it is still subjected to cross-examination, etc., but has a weight, the chances of conviction are much more brighter than the chances of conviction in scheduled offenses. That's the reason the legislative intent is to make this act stand alone. But they would be heard unless they interpret, unless they amend the definition proceeds of crime to you. It won't be that easy for the courts to decide upon. So lots will go in that process, and therefore, in the event of arrest, the other procedures will remain same, to be produced within 24 hours. Of course, traveling time will be separated to the nearest magistrate, and then accordingly, if he's arrested outside, he go for a transit remand, bring here, produce before the special court PMLA. Now, again, I said, since the offense of money laundering is to be tried by the special judge PMLA, which is the rank of district and session, additional district and session judges, because every high courts have notified 1, 2, 5, like in Delhi, all the district and session, additional district and session judges are made special judges for PMLA. But certain states, 1 or 2, 3, 5, this is how they notified it. Only that judge, even the charge, even the complaint would be filed under Section 45 for prosecution, and the cognizance will be taken by that court only, by the session judge. So therefore, the requirement under this act are completely different from what is required for the trial and the procedure for scheduled offenses. Now, the situation is that when we talk of trial, coupled with Section 52 statement, the documents are also mandated to be exhibited. But sometime in one of the trial, though the documents were summoned from the bank, but were not testified, authenticated. The plea of the defense was cannot be exhibited because they are not. But one of the court has given the interpretation, which according to me finds a lot of positivity in the sense, it says no. Investigating agency have summoned these documents by issuing summoned as per the procedure under law. And the bank official accordingly producing these documents, and a statement is also recorded that yes, I brought these documents, etc. On the basis of those summons, can be executed. So there is lot of I don't think this is an interpretation where we can say no, we can question the session judge has no power to interpret. There is no question of interpretation. It's a basically applicability of law, practical aspect of the trial. These challenges are coming day by day under money laundering because the rigor. Now, most I luckily remember now one aspect which I forgot. A lot of people have relied upon the Nikesh Tarachand Shah of Honorable Supreme Court interpretation, where the two rigors of Section 45 were removed. What was those rigors? It's very interesting to understand. Now, what happened that before 2012, as I told, the schedule offences were Part A, B, and C. Part A contains certain provisions. Part B contains certain provisions. Part C contains certain schedule offences, depending on various categories. Now, Section 420 and 120B were not the schedule offences earlier. They were made schedule offences with effect from 1/6/2009. Now, by 2012, the schedule offences like 420, 120B was also Part B offense. The Part B omitted and merged with Part A. So, Part B now, complete sections having 467 also, 489 also, 302 also, 420 also, 120B also. The Honorable Supreme Court has observed that you can't have the same rigor for 302, 467, equivalent to the rigor of 420, 120B, where the sentence is up to 3 years. So this is absurd. This rigor cannot be for the different offences categorized and having a different sentences. Because the offence giving a life sentence can't having the same rigor with Section 420 of cheating. So therefore, the rigors were, because the Section 45 was totally dependent on that, saying that the rigor or the schedule offences. The word used was schedule offense. Now, schedule offense, as I told, having a different sections 302, 489, and 420, 120B also, and other similar less sentences prescribed. Those offences were in Part B. Part B merged with Part A. All have come to Part A. So sentences were not segregated. So therefore, the rigor of this thing, that depending upon the schedule offense, they were omitted. But I am giving this interpretation, and I won also in Shabir Shah case, the Kashmiri separatist. I said, ultimately, it is the wisdom of the special judge or the court. Where is the difference between 439 and 45? Even I say the rigors are gone. Satisfaction of the court is must on the basis of material and the evidence on record. So even that rigor is gone. The discretion rests with the court, who is hearing the argument, looking into the gravity of the offense, nature of offense, material in hand. Either there are rigors or no rigors. 439 gives the same rigor, same power to the honorable judge to take a call whether it's a fit case to grant bail or not. And ultimately, if you read the orders also, the gravity of the offense, looking into the gravity of the offense. In normal cases also, IPC offenses and schedule offenses, the language is same. So therefore, I said rigor even if it's gone. Because while trials were going on, a lot of people applied for bail on the basis of Nikesh Tarachand Shah, saying now rigor has gone, so therefore it's become bailable offense. I said, sorry. Rigor is gone because of these differences, but ultimately 439, they are applying under bail for under Section 439. 439, the power is with the judge to look into the gravity of the offense and accordingly decide, take a call. The judge has agreed and rejected the bail, even going with Nikesh Tarachan. But again, there is now Rohit Tandon case, Honorable Supreme Court says something very, very, very serious. That economic offences cannot be equated with other offences, serious offence, bail should not be granted ordinarily, this and that, everything was there. But in Nikesh Tarachan Shah, they have given a different interpretation on the basis of this, which I just explained. But again, what? The amendment has brought in, now they have removed the word schedule offence and they brought the offence under this act. So the rigors are back. Earlier depending on schedule offence, now depending on this trial under this offence, money laundering offence. So Nikesh Tarachan, I told, probably because of the merger of Part B offences into Part A and the nature of sentences were so different, so the Honorable Supreme Court thought that it is not justifiable. But I am absolutely not commenting on that what is right, what is wrong. What I'm saying is this is my interpretation. And even now, which is not having any debate left because of the amendment in section 45. The rigors are back. Schedule offence is removed, offence under this act has been brought. So this is one of the major developments because the bails were, so much bails were coming before the court on the basis of that order. So that order is now, I have explained the reason for what? For reason why the lot of bails were applied and how the court has interpreted that. So this is also, I thought, it's one of the most important aspects because the bail is very tough to give bail for the offence of money laundering. But in between, this situation has come, which really gave hope to a lot of people that now it's a bailable offence. But again, as I told, this is how things have taken shape, and now the rigors are back. So this is the bail aspect also.
So Justice yes, Vaidyanathan of Madras High Court is the line.
Sir,
Rajiv.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Good morning, good morning, good afternoon. It started in the morning and completing in the afternoon. Very nice. In fact, I need to know that in this subject, the best person to put question to you is Justice Anand Venkatesh.
Yes, sir.
Because he'll be waiting.
Sir.
So let him post some questions. If anything is missed out, then definitely I'll ask. That apart, you have given a very useful lecture.
Thank you very much, sir.
Though it appears to be from the prosecution side, but definitely, we'll be in a position to understand better.
But no, sir, I've taken care of the positive, the defense side also.
Yes,
but there are certain limitations because of the
yes.
Sanjay, ASG of Patna.
Yeah. It was very heartening and really thought-provoking. Thank you for such a thing. And I have only one question I would like to.
Yes, sir, please.
Really, we have been making research on that subject.
Ji.
Now, after the judgment of Honorable Justice Rohinton Nariman, Nikesh Shah case.
Nikesh Tarachan Shah.
Nikesh Tarachan Shah, yeah. Now, in that judgment, the court said that this section 45(2) clause is bad in law and bad.
I said, Sanjay just explained because the two rigors were there.
Yeah.
Like in the sense, if the sentence is this much, then the prosecutor will be heard, and if he raises the objection, this and that. Like in NDPS section 37, sir.
Yeah.
So those rigors were there, but the reason I explained, sir, what clicked to the honorable judge was that the part B, which were having the offences showing the punishment up to 3 years, 5 years, 4 years.
Yeah.
So those were merged with part A, which were having a serious offences like 302, 489, life imprisonment, more than 10 years, etc.
Yes.
So they said, how can you put rigors for the offence of 302 also in the similar manner, and for offence of 420 and 120B also for the same fashion?
Yes.
So this is absurd, and this has happened because of 2012 amendment in the schedule.
Yes, but then in 2019, the amendment which they made,
G.
the selling of 1 crore has been put into that.
G. Earlier it
When
was
the
30.
amount increases 1 crore and above,
Yeah.
then only those clauses will be now attracted. What do you say about that?
No, sir. I think the 30 lakh and 1 crore threshold basically has nothing to do with the rigors. Basically, it is for the purpose of improving the quality of investigation, because of the number of cases have increased where the magnitude is much higher. So earlier it was 30 lakhs that every kind of FIR was coming, etc. So to maintain the quality, they said, let's enhance the threshold. So therefore, it has increased to 30 lakhs to 1 crore.
That's correct.
Yes.
Now, according to you,
G.
the amendment which has been brought,
Right, sir.
now, whether they remove the lacunas pointed out by Justice Rohinton Nariman in Nikesh Tarachand Shah case or not?
Yes. This is what I said, sir. Earlier it was section 45 law. If you see, sir, Sanjay ji, that the rigor was connecting with the schedule offense.
Yeah.
So therefore, part 1 contains the schedule offenses.
Yeah.
Now that rigor has gone, instead of now the rigor has come that offense under this act means money laundering offense.
Yeah.
Where the nature of rigor is definitely much more serious than the nature in the schedule offense. So therefore, now again the rigors have come back, but not depending on the schedule offense, but depending on the offense under this act.
In fact, let me tell you and share with you all
G.
that there is a case going on in Patna High Court.
G.
This aspect.
Right, sir.
Relying on the judgment of Supreme Court.
Yes, sir.
Of course, that case was a small matter, but then the question which was raised in that matter, that now in the judgment of Nikesh Tarachand Shah case, now the Supreme Court has virtually done away with those conditions.
No, sir, I have explained
it. Not at all be attracted.
Yeah, sir, I have explained
on that issue, that case is there.
Sir, if you see earlier, the language of section 45 was that in relation to schedule offense. So schedule offense, the ambiguity was that 420 the rigor were same and 302 rigors were same. It really bothered the honorable judge in Supreme Court. But now the rigor of schedule offenses is gone, and rigor under this act, which are completely different from the rigor of schedule offense, has come into picture. So now the court has to see the gravity of the offense under this act, PMLA Act, nothing to do with the schedule offense. So that aspect is gone.
But still you will find that in the definition section,
G,
the word is still used, schedule offense.
This is what I said, sir. If you see the definition of proceeds of crime, still it is saying that whosoever directly, indirectly obtains the proceeds of crime resulting through a schedule offense.
Yeah.
But the now amendments which have taken place in section 5, section 8, section 3 and section 44, 45 is completely negating that. In the beginning itself I told earlier this act was completely dependent on schedule offense.
Yeah.
Because 8.4 used to say the moment you are acquitted in schedule offense, the attachment ceases to have an effect, meaning thereby no proceeding under PMLA. Now
standalone offense.
Now they are trying to make it a standalone by bringing section 8.4, which says that nothing doing with the schedule offense, the attachment shall continue during the pendency of the offense under this act. And 8.5 says that if the person is acquitted in the offense of money laundering by the special judge, then the attachment will go. So even if you are acquitted in schedule offense, as the case earlier, attachment will not be lifted off. Now you have to depend on the trial of offense under this act, that is under section 3 and 4.
But still, there are many aspects which needs to be considered and decided at the earliest by the Supreme Court.
Sir, but all the issues are pending. I told you that Mahanivesh oil, etc., etc.
Yes.
Actually, 30-40 petitions are pending on different issues arising from Ashwini Kumar Mishra, Mahanivesh oil, this
Raju Ram Lingan's case also. Andhra Pradesh.
Which one?
That Raju Ramalingan's case.
Raju, no, B. Rama Raju case, sir, it was filed in 2011.
Yeah.
But still pending, but much water has flown over thereafter. There are 5
But
amendments.
many cases are still pending which needs to be decided at
Yes, I told you that High Court has given different views on different provisions, and all these issues are challenged before Honorable Supreme Court. Even the Supreme Court has called certain petition from High Court directly to Supreme Court, and which are pending adjudication. Unless the Supreme Court decides, nothing takes a shape.
And there are a lot of conflicting views of different High Courts.
Different, yes, sir, yes.
Delhi High Court taking one view, Bombay High Court taking another view.
Sir, Sanjay ji, I am telling you frankly, I told you this the problem with this is this act is being butchered by kind of assistance rendered in the court. Defense side always starts there is no schedule offense, ingredients of schedule offense are missing, this and that. But actually the scheme is completely different. So everything is happening everywhere. But if you see the judgments of V. Rama Raju, Radhamohan Lakoti, etc., you will see that it's like a song. Yes, this is correct, this is correct, this is correct. Because nothing was contrary to the scheme of the act.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to interact.
Sir, I am waiting. I am eagerly awaiting to have a Patna weather also, sir.
I must thank Mr. Raghavan also.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay, for the nice interaction.
Opportunity.
This is Anand Venkatesh of Madras.
Good afternoon. The offence about which we are talking is under Section 3 of the Money Laundering Act.
Yes, sir.
3 of the Money Laundering Act is the one which actually defines money laundering, because that's what the definition of money laundering says.
Yes.
Definition of money laundering specifically says that money laundering means, as defined in, if I'm right, as defined in Section 3.
Yes.
So when we go to Section 3,
yes, sir.
Section 3 very specifically uses the word connected to the proceeds of the crime.
Yes, very correct.
So connected to the proceeds of the crime is the sine qua non to make it an offence under the Section 3 of the Money Laundering Act.
Wonderful, yes, sir.
So then comes the definition of proceeds of crime.
Yes, sir.
So proceeds of crime is defined under 2U.
Yes.
2U very specifically says,
yes, sir,
that proceeds of crime will mean a property derived or obtained,
yes, sir,
directly or indirectly,
yes,
by
sir,
any person as a result of a criminal activity related to a scheduled offence.
Yes, correct.
That is there. So what used to happen is that earlier the scope of this act was to deal with more serious offences, which had an implication on the national interest per se,
yes,
like the proceeds of narcotics, the violation of etc. Slowly, after the inclusion of the offences which are private in nature,
yes,
as between two persons,
yes, sir,
where it involved 467, 468, 471, 420, etc. What has happened is that there is a tendency,
yes,
this is where I want to come, there is a tendency where the investigating agencies in the predicate offence, which we call as predicate offence always, the predicate offence is the offence which is the trigger point for this to happen. So there the tendency seems to be that they register the FIR and hands over everything to money laundering.
Yes,
so there is that tendency which is growing. So there are two questions which I want to make. One is that I find that the process of this money laundering is focusing more. I would not say everything is doing that. Is focusing more even on those private disputes as between A and B.
Sir.
As between A and B. So when that comes, what happens is that the stage of the predicate offence becomes very important. The predicate offence will remain in the FIR stage. And there would have been absolutely no investigation at all. Whereas, after handing over of the entire the files to the enforcement directorate, something parallelly starts up. So, and what happens is that this continues to remain in the FIR stage. there lots of things start happening. So the one important question which again and again arises is that what will ultimately happen if the police files a negative report in the predicate offense?
Sir, now you asked me a very interesting question.
That is number one. I'll ask both the questions so that you can answer. That is number one. Number two is, as you rightly said, the section 44 contemplates a joint trial both for the schedule offense as well as in cases where the final report has already been filed. So therefore, my question is, before a complaint is even filed, before the special court for an offense under section 3, according to you, what is the stage at which it can be done? Can it be done even at a stage where the predicate offense is in the FIR stage? These are the two things which
thank you for the question, sir. We are very important and really very where a lot of confusion is there. Now, the two things which are emerging out of your query. Number one, the FIR which is filed, but police authorities are keeping it at bay and nothing was done. Suddenly, the case is referred to ED and ED started investigating. Now, sir, it depends on the year. If it is prior to 2012 amendment, it will not be having retrospective effect. If it is prior to 2009, again the situation will be different, sir. What was the scheme of the act at that particular time? So my submission would be that if it is after 2013, then definitely, even if the FIR is there, the attachment proceedings can go on under PMLA.
Yes.
But if it is prior to 2000, if we talk of 2013, 2012, definitely there must be a charge sheet before the court.
Okay.
So therefore, it is very important because as I told initially, this act has been amended very fast, 5-6 times. So we have to understand the scheme of 2005 Act. We have to understand the scheme of 2009 amendment, the implication of 2009 amendment. We have to understand the implication of 2012 amendment.
Yes.
It all depends that what is the cause of action date. When is the FIR registered? Suppose, for example, sir, FIR registered in the year 2006 and the charge sheet is filed somewhere in 2010. I give you a judgment because V. Prabhakar Gupta, Justice Nuti Ramarao judgment of Andhra Pradesh High Court, where the interpretation had come that 420 and 120B were not scheduled offences when the FIR registered.
Yes.
That was the situation. But sir, then I argued, sorry, the amendment came in effect from 1/6/2009. And the police has filed the charge sheet in November 2009. We are not dependent on the FIR offences. We are concerned with the offences mentioned in the charge sheet as contemplated under section 5. If Lordship would see that the proviso provided that there must be a charge sheet in relation to the schedule offense under section 173 CRPC or a complaint or etc. or before the court. So that time it was nothing to do with the FIR offences, sir. We are concerned what offences are disclosed in the charge sheet. So in November 2009, 420 and 120B were added. So I said, sorry, sir, this is the situation. Therefore, there is nothing wrong about in our action. And that was the judgment of V. Prabhakar Gupta, where the Honorable Judge has agreed with me, says, yes, date of filing of charge is relevant, not the date of FI.
Okay.
Right.
No, I think the other portion of it. So what I am saying is that you are talking about the filing of the final report. I understand that. Because there is some sort of a clarity in 44 also. Cases where no final report is not, where the final report is not even filed.
That is what I'm saying. Then if it is prior to 2012, sir, nothing happens because there is no charge sheet. But if we talk of 2013 after, they brought it a stage of FIR. So that is the reason I said amendments are very, very relevant, because if, sir, this situation is emerging from before 2012, where the charge sheet stage was prevailing,
Okay.
then it will be there has to be a charge sheet.
Okay.
But if it is FIR is after 2013,
Yes.
then the FIR stage is itself is sufficient, sir, as amended, as amendment appearing in section 8 of the PM.
So what happens if ultimately a negative report is filed?
So then again, sir, so far I am telling you, sir, that no court has given a proper interpretation of
Okay.
that. It's a very,
No, I'm only asking your opinion. I know that it is a very nice
opinion, sir, of this is that ultimately that I don't think because if we talk of the amendment, this is even there is nothing in the schedule offense, still we can go on. But I feel that there must be something before of the schedule offense also. But sir, again, it depends on very different situation where a party enters into a compromise and get an FIR request. And might be there might be some technicality, death of somebody or some like it abets, etc. So there are many situations, but the correct interpretation of situation would be if it is a legitimate case, FIR is there, after investigation, the final report is filed disclosing commission of no offense on the basis of material on record, and the order of the schedule offense so records, then sir, PMLA court can't brush aside and close eyes, for the findings given and the record speaks.
Okay.
Still continue with the money laundering. Please. This is what my interpretation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Rajiv,
Ji, sir.
Retired judge of Madras High Court, who is practicing Supreme Court, Justice Nagamuthu wants to talk.
Yeah, please.
SNJ, sir.
Yes, I'm here. Sir, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
So, I got one or two questions, sir, which may appear very fundamental.
Yeah, please.
Sir. But please, it is. I am only placing it for your thinking.
Yeah, please, sir.
Now, my question is relating to some question raised by Honorable Justice Ananth Venkatesh.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So, here is a case where police people are investigating and they are not doing anything substantial.
Ji.
So, matter is simultaneously being handled by these ED people. Okay?
Right.
Now, question is whether they are doing investigation.
Ji.
Whether under this act.
Ji.
Number one. Number two.
Ji.
If you are going to say yes, they are doing investigation,
Ji.
whether that power to investigate is confined only to the offense under the PMLA Act or it extends to the predicate offense also. That is 420 or some other offense also.
Yes.
Number two. If you are going to say yes, they are doing investigation, whether they can be equated to a police officer for the purpose of section 25, because you know that under the NDPS Act, the very question as to whether these officers are police officers only for the purpose of section 25 is now pending before the larger bench of the Honorable Supreme Court.
Yes.
The one set of question. My second set of question is, if you are going to say no, they are not doing investigation, they are only holding inquiry. Now, can they, when after the police has closed the case as a mistake effect, the closure report has been filed. When these officers do not have the power to investigate, they can only hold inquiry. Whether that power to hold inquiry, if at all you are going to say that they are holding only inquiry, not investigation, whether that power can go to the extent of investigating into the predicate offense and file a private complaint before the court. So this is kindly.
Sir, absolutely. Thank you for your questions. Very valuable and really the burning question. But I'll explain one thing, sir. The moment action under PMLA starts, there is nothing called inquiry under the Act. It is investigation. As I told, this Act contemplates two kind of parallel proceedings. Number one, the attachment of the properties which are derived and obtained from the proceeds of crime, which is an immediate and urgent measure, and thereafter completion of recording evidence, collecting material, etc., filing prosecution complaint under section 45. Right, sir? So, as I told earlier to Justice Venkata also, that if the FIR is prior to amendment 2012, the question of having a charge sheet is must. But if it is after 2012, rather 2013, February 2013, then we have to see that what are the findings in the closing report of the police in the schedule offense. As I explained, sir, there could be many reasons. For example, there is a compromise between the parties. There is some technical aspect because of which proceedings cannot move forward, or the abatement of trial, etc., etc., many. But if the person has been discharged or a final report is filed, accepted by the court with a recent order, disclosing there is absolutely no material, even the very basis of initiation of action was bad in the eyes of law. According to me, no court, including Special Judge PMLA, who is trying the offense of money laundering, cannot close its eyes on the findings given and viewing the material in his hand and in the schedule offense and the findings given by the schedule offense court. So this is what my observation to this is. Purely you can say if no action has been taken by police, that will not debar the PMLA proceedings. The action can be taken in view of 2013 amendment.
Yes. Sir, see, incidental to that, I got one small doubt.
Right, sir, please.
The section 2 NA,
G.
which speaks of investigation. Is it there in the statute book as of now, sir? Sir, I find I have gone through the official website of the Law Ministry, which shows that this provision in NA has been taken away by some amendment. I do not know what it is.
Which section? 2
NA. 2 NA.
2 NA.
Yes.
No, I don't think so, sir. There must be some confusion somewhere.
No, you please kindly go to the official website of the Law Ministry.
I will look into it. But so far, all the acts, when it was, can you tell me, and are they giving any date or year?
No, you are sure that the NA is there in statute book?
NA is still existing in statute book.
NA is there. If NA is there, then as you rightly pointed out, everything that is done by the authority is investigation. Is it collection? It is investigation.
Yes.
Except the power to file final report, they exercise all the other powers commencing from section 16 onwards.
Yes.
So they can enter, they can search.
That's why I told you, the word you used that there would be inquiry. I said there is nothing like inquiry in this act.
Yes.
Whatever action, the moment this is action and the PML is started, they issue summon under section 52, 50 subclause 2 to record and calling upon that person to bring the material, recording the statement, etc. It's all part of investigation.
Sir, you please kindly go to section 16.
16.
Yes, 16.
Yeah, please.
So, 16.3 says that record the statement of any person present in the place. Okay, this is related to power of survey.
Some power of survey, sir. I told you 16 to 20.
Recording statement. Please kindly note recording statement.
G.
If you go to section 17, see sir.
Yeah.
There it says examine on oath any person.
G.
17F. Examine on oath any person who is found to be in possession or control of any record or property. So here it is something different. And if you go to section 18, 18.9, the authority shall record the statement of the person. So in some places the act empowers them only to record the statement.
Sir,
why should there be this kind of
I'll explain, sir.
Okay.
When we talk of recording of statement,
yes,
please remember, he has a power to record under section 52.
Yes.
And once it is recorded under section 50 subclause 2,
yes,
it is admissible under the Evidence Act.
yes.
The mentioning of this word of recording on oath, recording statement, etc. is immaterial because he can only record under section 52.
52.
These are,
We are referring to 52.
52, section 50 subclause 2.
Okay.
Right.
Yes.
Now the words which are appearing here, recording statement, on oath, etc., this is with regard to search and seizure. Like I'll tell you, Panchnama. The records, everything is searched, and finally one or two persons who were present at the spot asked to sign, etc. So instead of signature, etc., they are recording 4 or 5 lines also that yes, I was present, it is possession, recovered from here, this and that, right? So actual statement which is basically recorded for the purpose of investigation, I'm using the word investigation, is under section 50 subclause 2.
Okay.
Right, sir? So the remaining in procedural in nature hardly makes an impact because the power of search, seizure, everything, like 17 is power of search of the premises, 18 is the personal search, 19 is the arrest, 21, 22 are the recovery of immovable properties and attachment, etc., etc., etc. So these are basically, that is why I said, the entire act revolves around 4 provisions, 5, 8, 3, and 4. Remaining more or less are procedural in nature, which empowers the ED officers to do in a particular fashion any act for the collection of evidence, for the collection of documents, etc.
Sir, I understand that. I want to know from you, your views only I want on this. When section 52 simply speaks of examination of persons. Okay. Subsection 3, which they are examined or make statements. Okay. So one is examination, the other one is statement. Now, this provision does not specifically say whether oath is to be administered or not. So this is to be read along with this section of section 16, 17 and 18. Now, all the statements, irrespective of whether it is recorded on oath or not, is admissible in evidence according to you, and we also agree with this.
No, sir. Any statement recorded under section 50 subclause 2 is admissible under the Evidence Act.
That's what, sir. That is what I want your clarification. Under section 52, a statement can be recorded. A person can also be examined. So does it mean that whether oath is to be administered or not?
No, if the act says oath, they have to administer the oath. If they have not, it's a basic. I said this is a
statement.
Procedural irregularity, not illegality.
Please kindly consider. There are two expressions. This only creates some doubt in me. Number one, they are examined or make statements. Please kindly see. Examination is one thing. Making statement is something different. Examination means the next subsection 4, every proceeding under section 2 or 3 shall be deemed to be judicial proceeding. Now, if you go to section 16, 17 and 18, in two provisions, as I have pointed out, they say that they have to simply record statement without administering oath, and this is to be read into section 52. And whereas in one provision alone, that is in section 17 alone, it said that oath is to be administered. Okay. So 16, 17, and 18 cannot be read in isolation because they also speak of the power. They are to be read into section 52, and therefore, when we can, what I feel is it is my understanding. I do not know what you are going to say. Examination means recording a statement on oath. Statement means without recording oath. So it makes all the difference. It makes all the difference. You are going to admit every statement in evidence. Okay. This is going to, after all, this is going to have only corroborative value.
Yes, that is what I'm saying. There are certain like any statement recorded under section 52.
Suppose if a person resides from his earlier statement, which is only a statement, then I do not know whether he can be prosecuted for perjury. Whereas if it is on oath, certainly he can be prosecuted for perjury.
You are absolutely right, sir. You are absolutely right.
One aspect of the matter. No, my doubt is when the statement is that of the accused himself, whether oath is to be administered or not.
No.
Why?
Because he's an accused.
He will become an accused according to the Supreme Court only after the complaint is filed into court.
No. Sir, there is a difference. If you see the scheme of the act says any person who has committed the scheduled offense named in that and and there is an FIR and charge sheet.
Sir,
Right.
sir, sorry, I understand that. If we are going to hold that he is to be treated as an accused, okay, then compelling him to make a statement will be hit by Article 23. That is also too well settled in number of cases. Okay, it's one of Supreme Court. Statement will not be admissible at all because it will be contrary to Article 23. That is why the Supreme Court, in several cases, including I think that it is in Kanyalal, has said that he becomes an accused only when private complaint is filed into court. Here, you are filing private complaint. Until then, he is not treated as an accused. Though he is arrested, he is remanded, etc. Okay.
So that is why the words are always used prima facie. He can't be accused unless held guilty, sir. This is the
please examine these issues. What I want to impress upon you is that the statement of the accused should be hit by Section 25. If you are going to say that he is an accused, then you are compelling him to make a statement. It is hit by Article 23. If you are going to say that the police officer doing investigation, then the statement will be hit by Section 25. So these two aspects have not been explored by the Honorable Supreme Court so far with regard to Money Laundering Act.
Sir, it will be settled because the reason is
Customs Act.
Sir, yes. Sir, there are two situations. If you see that you have a vast experience that we.
Please.
If the person is immediately arrested,
yes,
then the arrest, as I told under Section 19.
He is an accused. He is an accused.
He is an accused, and under Section 19, sir, if you see the Section 19 of this Act, the same rigor is there in Section 5 and 8 of the record the reason to believe in writing. He has to give reasons of arrest also, which is not basically required as far as police is concerned. So therefore, one thing is there, if I arrest him immediately, 52 goes. 52 is nothing, even if I record his statement.
Okay, so please explore, sir. Please explore this possibility because this issue has not been so far raised and answered before the Honorable Supreme Court. Though this has been raised in Customs Act, Central Excise Act.
So that is what I'm saying. Different. I have argued, sir, all this being Radhamohan Lakoti, etc. All these issues. I said it's a special law having an overriding effect, having a complete scheme. Because Hari Narayan Shivare, the Honorable Supreme Court says it's a self-contained law.
Sir, 1 second, please wait. In none of the cases we are dealing with CRPC, we are dealing with Customs Act Special Act, Narcotics Act Special Act, and you are very familiar with this Tofansi case, which is pending being argued before the Supreme Court. Same issue. Please explore the possibility. I'm not debating. I only bring you to your notice. Please.
No, it's good, sir. You are enhancing my knowledge, sir. I'm so grateful. You are enhancing, giving me feedback where I should be prepared for all these police in the future.
Thank you.
So I should thank you for the very illustrative and painstaking effort and lecture on your side. And the discussion was very meaningful. Interaction was very helpful. So thanks for having accepted the invitation and delivered a beautiful lecture, sir.
I'm thankful to you and your webinar for giving me this opportunity. Of course, especially Justice Vaidyanathan. Thank you very much.